All right. Ooh. I don't know. I'm not the IT guy. I don't know anything about that stuff. Anyway, I know there's no other microphone up here, right? Anyway, we are in the book of Ruth. Of course, I might have said this last week, but I'll say it again, and I think we'll finish it tonight, but maybe not. Depends on what we get into. It's a very good book, very profitable study. And we're actually in Ruth chapter at the end of chapter 3. Yeah, let me get over there. Wow. Yes, the end of chapter 3, particularly verse 14 through 18, chapter 3, verse 14 through 18. And what we have so far here, we have, of course, a family. Let's see, is that right? Yeah, Naomi, Elimelech, and 2 sons. And Elimelech dies. The 2 sons marry. And then the 2 sons die. And so we have 3 women left. Naomi, Orpah, and Ruth. Orpah goes back home. And Ruth and Naomi, Ruth commits herself to Naomi. Chapter 1, 16 and 17, that great passage there. And then they end up going back to Jerusalem. Now we are in, they are from Bethlehem, Judea, which is going to be like, well, right up around in here somewhere, right there I think it is. And they go to Moab. And why did they go to Moab? Yeah, there was a famine over here. They go to Moab. In fact, the two sons married Moabite women. And so Ruth is a Moabitess. And they go back to the village in Bethlehem. And of course, Ruth wants to go and glean to help the family survive. The 2 of them survive. They're both widows. And Boaz takes a liking to her, notices her, takes a liking to her. And Naomi, Ruth's mother-in-law, tells Ruth in chapter 3 to go lay by his feet at night when he is threshing at the threshing floor. And we talked about that last week. And though some try to make something immoral out of it, there's no immorality involved in that. That was just a custom back in that day that we don't really even know all the details of the custom, but we do have it mentioned there. And so in chapter 3, verse 14, I'll just read 14. Oh, well, actually, let me finish up there. And so at the threshing floor, we covered that point, And we're right here in this point, Ruth's return to Naomi. And the return is after she goes and lays at Boaz's feet at the threshing floor at night. Now in verse 14, chapter 3:14, I'll read 3:14 through 18. So she lay at his feet until morning, and she arose before one could recognize another. Before one could recognize another. Yes, then he said, do not let it be known that the woman came to the threshing floor. And over here. Also he said, bring the shawl that is on you and hold it. And when she held it, he measured 6 ephahs of barley and laid it on her. Then she went into the city. So when she came to her mother-in-law, she said, is that you, my daughter? Then she told her all that the man had done for her. And she said, these 6 ephahs of barley he gave me, for he said to me, do not go empty-handed to your mother-in-law. And then she said, sit still, my daughter, until you know how the matter will turn out, for the man will not rest until he has concluded the matter this day. All right, now what relationship was Boaz to Naomi? Yes, it. Her husband's relative, that's all we know. Kinsman, when we talked about that last week, he is called a kinsman, near kinsman, some translations have. And so she was related to the family, and that definitely has a role to play in all this. Well, verse 14, where we picked up our reading, is after Naomi told Ruth to go lay and perform that custom. Basically, it was a marriage proposition, if you will. And but anyway, so she lay at his feet. She did what Naomi said in verse 14. And she arose before one could recognize another. And this is very early in the morning while it's still dark out. And again, we did talk about last week that sometime, the the view that takes this as an immoral thing down through verse 13, it was true that sometimes at the threshing floor they would thresh at night, or the threshing floor, and of course they would take the grain and the husk and they'd throw it up in the air, and the breeze would blow away the chaff, and the grain would fall down, and that's how they would collect it. And during this time of the year, the days are often really breezy and gusty, but at night the wind would be more consistent. So a lot of times it was better to do it at night than it was during the day. But sometimes at night, people could hide behind the stacks of barley or the sheaves of barley and all that. And so there could be some immoral stuff going on there. And by her leaving very early in the morning before one could recognize another, this would likely be so that no one would think bad thoughts about this. She could just get out of Dodge, if you will, and go back home before anybody would know. But notice she also, Boaz also, he said, do not let it be known. The woman came to the threshing floor, but verse 15, he gives her 6 ephahs of barley. And I think we mentioned an ephah. Did we mention that last week? Something was about, half a bushel. Okay, which was about 20 liters, which is about 10 bottles of Coke, 2-liter bottles of Coke. I think we had that. But anyway, so he gave her a lot of grain to take back. And notice he explicitly says, as Ruth reported to Naomi, down in verse 17, he told her, do not go empty-handed to your mother-in-law. So he does have not just Ruth in mind, but the whole family, which is just 2 of them, of course. All right. And then, we should have started at verse 12, I think, actually. Yeah, go ahead. Right, that's verse 12. Yeah, we should have started at verse 12. Go back up to verse 12. Now it is true that I am a close relative. Oh, because after she lays at his feet down there, verse 11, and now my daughter, do not fear, I will do for you all that you request. For all the people of my town know that you are a virtuous woman. All right, now verse 12, now it is true that I am a close relative. However, there is a closer than I. All right, and this redeemer, kinsman redeemer, we did talk about it. Let's just look at one passage here to refresh our memory. If you look at Leviticus 25:49, Leviticus 25:49, and of course, there was a certain order. The closest kin available was to perform the rites of the kinsman redeemer. But Leviticus 25 and verse 49, verse 48, after he is sold, he may be redeemed again. One of his brothers may redeem him, or his uncle's son may redeem him, or anyone who is near of kin to him in his family may redeem him. If he is able, he may redeem himself. And that's talking about redeeming, I believe, a slave or something. But anyway, it's the same type of principle here, that the kinsman redeemer, because remember, Ruth's husband died without children. And so under the law, that if they die without children, we'll look at that verse in a moment, the kinsman redeemer or the nearest kin or whatever could go in there and raise seed so that man could have seed. And we talked a little bit about that last week. And that was because, one of the reasons anyway, is because this nation had to be intact. All the tribes, all the families had to be intact so that the Christ could come through whom he was supposed to, and so forth. And we'll get that at the end when we get the genealogy there of David. All right? But Boaz knows there's another relative closer than he is to Ruth's husband who would have the opportunity to do this. And so verse 13, he says to her, Boaz says to Ruth, stay this night. In the morning it shall be that if he will perform the duty of a close relative for you, good, let him do it. But if he does not want to perform the duty for you, then I will perform the duty for you as the Lord lives. Lie down until morning. All right, so he emphasizes here when he says perform the duty, if he will perform the duty. Notice he doesn't talk about it in terms of marriage, but in terms of performing the duty. And he is emphasizing the family responsibility that is here with this this nearest of kin. And also, I'm told in the Hebrew language that the word I, then I will perform the duty for you, is very emphatic. that he is like wanting to do this. And he does give a little oath, if you will, of sorts, as the Lord lives. I will perform the duty for you as the Lord lives. But he tells her to lie down until morning. And so stay put where you are, and he will work on that. All right? And then verse 14, so she lay at his feet until morning. We read that. And she stayed there till morning. He recognized her. He sent her out while it was still dark, and gave her the ephahs of barley. They went into the city. So when she came, verse 16 we'll pick up. So when she came to her mother-in-law, she said, "Is that you, my daughter?" And that question, "is that you," is differently translated in the translations. Yeah, "who art thou?" Okay. Does it say "my daughter"? "Who art thou, my daughter"? Yeah, okay. And "who art thou?" And maybe it was so dark she didn't recognize her, or it might be the case, as a couple of commentaries said, that she's not really asking so much, "is that you?" as is, how did it go? Were you accepted? Were you rejected? Was the whole thing, did it go as planned? But either way, she asked, "Is that you?" or "who art thou?" Then she told her all that the man had done for her. And who is that man? Boaz, right? And she said, "These 6 ephahs of barley he gave me, for he said to me, 'Do not go empty-handed to your mother-in-law.'" Then Naomi said to Ruth, "Sit still, my daughter, until you know how the matter will turn out, for the man will not rest until he has concluded the matter this day." In other words, sit still, have some patience. Naomi knows that Boaz, after accepting the situation, she knows that Boaz is going to take care of things. He's not going to rest until this matter gets settled. And of course, she may know a little bit about Boaz anyway, since they're family. And of course, we know she was gone at least 10 years into Moab. And so she came back. We looked at that last week when she came back, or actually before the singing night. All right, any questions through chapter 3? All right, and then chapter 4, a transaction at the city gate, and a kinsman redeemer's refusal to redeem Naomi's land. All right, in verse 1, "Now Boaz went up to the gate and sat down there, and behold, the close relative of whom Boaz had spoken came by." All right, now the gate, of course, is where they would do business dealings and court hearings and things of this nature. Well, actually, let me just read through verse 6 and we'll come back and make comment. "So Boaz said, 'Come inside, friend, sit down here.' So he came aside and sat down, and he took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, 'Sit down here.' So they sat down. Then he said to the close relative, Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, sold the piece of land which belonged to her brother Elimelech. And I thought to inform you, saying, buy it back in the presence of the inhabitants of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not redeem it, then tell me, that I may know, for there is no one but you to redeem it, and I am next after you. And he said, I will redeem it. Then Boaz said, on the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you must also buy it from Ruth the Moabitess, the wife of the dead, to perpetuate the name of the dead through his inheritance. And the closer relative said, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I ruin mine own inheritance. You redeem it, or you redeem my right of redemption for yourself, for I cannot redeem it. All right, through verse 6. All right, and so as we mentioned earlier, the gate was a place that business and things of this nature would take place. And notice he called the next of kin. Now, he is never named there in the middle of verse 1. So Boaz said, come aside, friend, sit down here. He just calls him friend. And it may be that he didn't want to mention the name because the guy didn't want to do what he was, going to do. Sit down here. So he came and sat down. He also called 10 men of the elders of the city. And so they sat down there at the gate. Now the gate was a very public place. And we'll see later on that it looked like others joined the proceeding, perhaps out of curiosity or whatever. but they did join the proceeding. We'll get to that in a moment. All right, but notice in verse 3, he said to the close relative, Naomi, who has come back from the country. All right. Now let's read a couple verses here. Look at Deuteronomy. Let's see. First let's look at Leviticus 25 again. This time verse 23 and 24. Leviticus 25, 23 and 24. And I'll go ahead and read it since I have the microphone here. Leviticus 25, 23 and 24. The land shall not be sold permanently, for the land is mine, for you are strangers and sojourners with me, and in all the land of your possessions you shall grant redemption of the land. All right, and so the land was not to be sold permanently, not just to outsiders, but to those that were even outside of the tribe. Remember, the 12 tribes had their allotted land. Joshua, spread out the land and all that. Of course, the Levites didn't have any. But Joseph's two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, had some. And so they had all this land that they were to keep. But those lands were to stay within the tribes. And not just within the tribes, but even within the families. And if a family did have to sell the land, they were to be able to buy it back later, or else someone, the kinsman redeemer, would buy it back so it would stay in the land, in the family. And then if no one could afford to buy it back, then you had the year of Jubilee. It would be returned back anyway at the year of Jubilee. And so it's to always stay within that tribe or in that family. And again, one of the reasons why is because the Christ had to come to that lineage and do exactly as God had said. And that was part of the reason why. All right, now also look at Deuteronomy 25, 5 through 10. Yeah, we'll read it now because it's going to come up in verse 7 with that sandal business. All right, and Deuteronomy 25, verse 5 and 10. Now this is the law of Levirate. It's called Levirate marriage, and I forget where that name comes from. I'm sure I had to know it for a test one time back in the day. But Levirate marriage is what it's called, and we see it was practiced. We're going to look at Genesis 38 if we have enough time here when we get down to verse 12. But it was practiced before the law of Moses was given, and so I think it's something like slavery. God didn't invent it. The law of Moses didn't invent it. It was already in the land when they came to possess it. But what God did is He regulated it so that it would be as according to His will. All right, but in Deuteronomy 25, verse 5, if brothers dwell together and one of them dies and has no son, the widow of the dead man shall not be married to a stranger outside the family. Her husband's brother shall go into her, take her as his wife, and perform the duty of a husband's brother to her. All right, now notice it says the duty of the husband's brother. And it shall be that the firstborn son which she bears will succeed to the name of his dead brother, that his name may not be blotted out in Israel. But if the man does not want to take his brother's wife, then let his brother's wife go up to the gate to the elders and say, my husband's brother refuses to raise up a name to his brother in Israel. He will not perform the duty of my husband's brother. Then the elders of the city shall call him and speak to him. But if he stands firm and says, I do not want to take her, then his brother's wife shall come to him in the presence of the elders, remove his sandal from his foot, spit in his face, and answer and say, so shall it be done to the man who will not build up his brother's house. And his name shall be called in Israel, the house of him who had his sandal removed. All right? Okay, I laugh at that, but that was serious stuff back then. And, in other words, what kind of guy, especially in this kind of culture, what kind of man would not allow his brother to have seed that his line may continue? And, and it was more of a humiliation thing, I suppose. But notice in verse 8, I think it's pretty key, and I thought about, the role of elders today. Not to slap the guy with their flip-flop, but, But notice, then the elders of the city shall call him and speak to him. to try to encourage him to do what he should do. But if he stands firm and says, I do not want to take her, then this whole thing with the shoe. And but again, it was a serious thing. It was, tantamount to wishing ill will upon your brother's seed, his line.
I think the Arabs today still
Oh, yeah.
think about
Shoes. Yeah, yeah. I think the second Bush, when he was giving a speech, and he was giving a speech on the Middle East, and somebody took off their sandal, flung it at him, and he just dodged it and kept on going, But anyway, yeah, they still have a thing with feet, and in a lot of cultures over there, you're not supposed to, like in America, we'll sit with our feet up on our knees or whatever, but you're not supposed to show the bottom of your foot to somebody. That's like dissing them, disrespect them and all that stuff. But anyway, I read this here because it's going to come up again in verse 7. Well, a similarity in verse 7, all right? But anyway, that was the law of Levirate marriage. And again, the main reason for that was so that the brother's seed could continue. And again, all those families had to stay intact for the Christ to come through the lineage and so forth. All right, now we go back up here to verse 3. So the close relative, Boaz said to that close relative, Naomi has come back, and she sold a piece of land. And this is the first time we hear about her having to sell a piece of land. But she sold that land evidently before she left sometime. And so in verse 4, I thought to inform you, in the King James there has the word advertise, something about advertise, But that's to disclose something. And that Hebrew word was used in a lot of business transactions, where it was just privy between the two parties, buying or selling or whatever. But anyway, so I thought to inform you, saying, buy it back in the presence of the elders. Notice, buy it back in the presence of the inhabitants and the elders of my people. So with that word, in the presence of the inhabitants, it seems like others had joined the proceeding, which, in that kind of a culture, if you see some major thing going on, people tend to walk up and kind of listen in and see what's going on. Bystanders will gather in to see what's going on. That happens in our country and foreign countries as well. So that appears to be what happened here. Now notice what he says, if you will redeem it, but if you will not, then tell me that and again, I'm told that in the Hebrew, all these I's here are emphatic. I may know, for there is no one but you to redeem it, and I am next after you. And then the nearest kinsman said, I will redeem it. And that also is emphatic there. And so at that point, he thought for sure that he would redeem that. Probably he thought it belonged solely to Naomi, and there were no strings attached. Okay? But he finds out, verse 5, Boaz said, on the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you must also buy it from Ruth, the Moabitess, the wife of the dead. And the dead, again, her husband's name, do you remember that? Yeah, Malhan or something like that. Yeah. Yes, Ruth's husband. Yeah. Yeah. Because notice Ruth, the wife of the dead. And so the dead there is Malhan, to perpetuate the name of the dead through his inheritance. Now with that, what all was involved, the details aren't given, but the close relative said, I cannot redeem it for myself lest I ruin my own inheritance. All right, and so, buying that land implied that he would have to take Ruth as his wife to bring seed for her dead husband, Malhan. And so he says, I cannot do it. Now he does say, lest I ruin my own inheritance. Okay? And so he thought perhaps that would ruin his own, because he had his own family, undoubtedly, and that by doing that it would ruin his inheritance. So whatever the case he chose, he said, no, I cannot do it. And it possibly may have been, notice he said, it possibly may have been a money issue. Buying the land is one thing, but getting a wife, that's another thing. Some of us who are married, not my wife, she's pretty, not too demanding money-wise, but sometimes it gets pretty expensive to marry a wife. Okay.
But he didn't have to raise up a child by himself, right? He
would have had to, yeah, right. As part of that's part of the package. All right. Now again, all the details, the text here doesn't tell us, and he may have been able to marry a wife if that was all that's involved. But probably, I'm saying probably was a money issue, but it doesn't really say for sure. But also, maybe by him, in his mind, him having to take on Ruth as a wife, or maybe another wife. He didn't want to do that. But whatever the case, he didn't want to do it. But notice what he says, but you, at the end of verse 6, you, Boaz, redeem my right of redemption for yourself. And again, his statement, the word you there is emphatic. Then also at the end of that clause he says, for yourself. For or because I cannot redeem it. And again, he doesn't say exactly why he can't do it. Yes. Yes. Yep. All right. Yeah. Now, of course, at the end of verse 4, he said, I will redeem it. But then after verse 5, he realized there was more involved to it than what he had thought. And so now he says, I cannot redeem it. Okay? And so, verse 7, now this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging. All right, now that statement tells us that the author writes way after the event, and he tells his readers this is what the custom was back here, and he tells us the custom. To confirm anything, one man took off his sandal and gave it to the other. And this was a confirmation in Israel. Therefore the close relative said to Boaz, buy it for yourself, so he took off his sandal. All right, now the sandal is common between what we read in Deuteronomy 25, but I don't think it's exactly the same here. In Deuteronomy 25, and by the way, well, yeah, we'll get to that next. But Deuteronomy 25, the guy refused to do it, and there was no one else in the picture to do it. And so his brother, or the woman's dead husband, or that guy's brother, was going to go without seed. In this case, though, it's not quite the same, because there's Boaz. He is willing and he is ready to do it if this other guy doesn't do it. And so Ruth is not left out in the cold either way. Whereas in Deuteronomy 25, that woman and her brother's seed was. Okay? But so this is kind of a different situation. But it is curious, it is interesting anyway, that taking off a sandal is involved. Okay? And so it may be the case that this custom evolved from that custom, but it doesn't say. Go ahead, Bob.
It's interesting. In some cases, even when they change the dress and they're in college, they take off the shoes and they wear it to the same kind of goes back to that.
Yeah. And we have, who's going to fill their shoes, Was that George Jones? I think it was. But, yeah. And so there is long-standing tradition of shoes being symbolic of transitions, okay, so to speak, okay? All right.
As far as the property is concerned,
it goes back to that family.
I was in a family that, in order to avoid taxes, they deeded us part of this property at Sanibel, and we could not sell it.
Yeah.
Unless we had to sell it to a family member.
Right, yeah, they'll put that in the deed. And, that church in Lithia gave the school of preaching that property, but there's a whole bunch of stuff in the deed that's keeping people from wanting to buy it. But anyway, that's another story, but yeah. All right, verse 9 then, and Boaz said, and in fact, I think we got a new, I kind of got ahead of myself. Where am I going here? All right, Boaz purchases the land, verse 7. We read that. Verse 9, let's go ahead and read 9 through 12. And Boaz said to the elders and all the people, you are witnesses this day that I have bought all that was Elimelech's and all that was Chilion's and Mahlon's from the hand of Naomi. Moreover, Ruth the Moabitess, the widow of Mahlon, I have acquired as my wife. All right? To perpetuate the name of the dead through his inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among his brethren and from his position at the gate. You are witnesses this day. And so here, notice he mentions in verse 10, I have acquired as my wife to perpetuate. And so Ruth is now his wife. So that shows us that marrying her was part of the deal. But he's happy with that. And notice he doesn't speak of her as property, but as my wife. I have acquired her as my wife. And then, and of course, you are all witnesses. Again, he started out with just 10 elders in the hearing, and then others kind of came around, but they're all witness of that. And this, you are all witnesses. Then verse 11, and all the people who were at the gate, and the elders said, we are witnesses. The Lord make the woman who is coming to your house like Rachel and Leah, the two who built the house of Israel, and may you prosper in Ephratah and be famous in Bethlehem. May your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, because of the offspring which the Lord will give you from this young woman. All right? And so, but in the end of verse 10, you are witnesses this day. Then verse 11, all the people who were at the gate and the elders said, we are witnesses. And that all makes this a publicly legal transaction, a legal marriage, a legal buying of property. And blessings were, notice again, all the people in verse 11, we are witnesses, the Lord make the woman who is coming. And so they pronounce these blessings upon this marriage. The Lord make the woman who is coming to your house like Rachel and Leah. What do we know about Rachel and Leah? That's right. They brought the children from whom Israel sprang, you know. And the two who built the house of Israel, and may you prosper in Ephratah and be famous in Bethlehem. That's the second blessing that they wish. May you prosper in Ephratah. And then verse 12, may your house be like the house of Perez. All right. Whom Tamar bore to Judah. All right. Now Perez, I got some notes on this right here. Perez, all right. Now, go to Genesis 38. Look at Genesis 38. Yeah, man. Woo. Well, the main comparison here, let me tell you that while you turn here. The main comparison here between Ruth and Tamar is neither their characters nor the manner in which they conceived, because remember Tamar's was a result of incest, but the common Levirate nature of their unions. Perez was conceived through Levirate marriage. Now Genesis 38, remembers, before the law of Moses was given. And let's see, in Genesis 38, well, let's see, if you go back up here, well, let's just go up here in verse 1. It came to pass at that time that Judah departed from his brothers and visited a certain Adulamite whose name was Hira, and Judah saw there a daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua, and he married her and went in to her. So she conceived and bore a son and called his name She conceived again and bore a son and called his name Onan, and she conceived yet again and bore a son and called his name Shelah. He was at Chezub when she bore him. Then Judah took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord killed him. And Judah said to Onan, go in to your brother's wife and marry her, and raise up an heir to your brother. But Onan knew that the heir would not be his, and it came to pass, when he went in to his brother's wife, that he emitted on the ground. This is the New King James translation, lest he should give an heir to his brother. And the thing which he did displeased the Lord, therefore he killed him also. All right, and then Judah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, remain a widow in your father's house till my son Shelah is grown, for he said, lest he also die like his brothers. And Tamar went and dwelt in her father's house. Then in the process of time, the daughter of Shua, Judah's wife, died, and Judah was comforted and went up to be his sheep shearers at Timnah, he and his friend Hira, the Adulamite. And it was told Tamar, saying, look, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep. So she took off her widow's garments and covered herself with the veil and wrapped herself and sat in an open place, which was on the way to Timnah, for she saw that Shelah was grown, and she was not given to him as a wife. And when Judah saw her, he thought she was a harlot, because she had covered her face, and so she dressed like a harlot. and so forth. And let's see. Anyway, so she I don't know if Juan was involved here or not, but I don't think so. But anyway, she gave a pledge and all that. But in verse 24, it came to pass about 3 months after that Judah was told, saying, Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has played the harlot. Furthermore, she is with child by harlotry. So Judah said, bring her here, let her be burned. But then it found out he's the one that got her pregnant, thinking that she was a prostitute. And don't go down to verse 29. And it happened as he drew back his hand, that his brother came out unexpectedly, and she said, how did you break through? This breach be upon you. Therefore his name was called Perez. All right? And afterward his brother came out, who had the scarlet thread in his hand, and his name was called Zerah. Okay? So Perez was born out of that situation. And of course Onan was supposed to do the Levirate marriage thing, but he didn't want to, because notice it says in verse 9, when he knew that the heir would not be his. When he went into his brother's wife, he admitted on the ground. I think the King James said, spilt his seed. Is that what it says? And the ESV, what's it got, Jason? If you have that on your fancy computer there. Okay, or if somebody has the ESV, it's a little bit more. Yeah, okay, don't read it. Well, it is the Bible, though, right? Okay, forget it. All right, anyway, it says something about semen or something. Yeah, under the law. Well, under the law of Moses it would be. In Leviticus chapter 20, it talks about all that. But of course, it is before the law, but it's definitely not right. All right, but anyway, so Onan, he was not put to death for masturbation. He was not put to death for birth control. He was put to death for wanting to have sex, but not wanting the responsibility, and that is to bring up seed for his brother. Okay, semen. Okay, it says emitted as semen or something like that. Well, I guess it's incest. It's a sin. It's a sin. Yeah, in Leviticus. Yeah. I don't know if they use the word incest or not, but in Leviticus 20 it talks about. But in Leviticus 20 it talks about all those sexual sins. Daughter and her father, a daughter and her mother-in-law, and all that kind of stuff, So it's in that list. And I'm not sure the exact definition of incest, but I don't think blood has to be involved when there's marriages involved in that, I don't think. But we can study that another time. Yeah, it's definitely fornication. Yeah, for sure. All right? But anyway, it's either Leviticus 20 or Leviticus 27. He lists a whole bunch of those, and he may actually call it incest in the Bible, but I have to check on that. I've read the list before. Okay, all right. But anyway, but Perez is why we're going to this, because in verse 12, going back to Ruth 4:12, may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah. And again, the comparison is not their character. Ruth and Tamar, totally different character. But the comparison is the manner in which they conceived. They conceived through a relative, and the child that came to that relative did great things. And Perez, the clan of Perez within the tribe of Judah was very influential in the Old Testament. And so that's where the comparison is. All right? But anyway, so that's one of the blessings upon them, because of the offspring which the Lord had given you from this young woman. And so Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. Verse 13, oh yeah, and so we have a whole other heading there, the birth of a son. And notice she took wife, and Boaz took Ruth, and that word took is the idea of married. And she became his wife, and when he went into her, sexual relationship, the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. All right, and remember, Naomi, way back, still in Moab, wanted those girls to go back so that they could have sons, they could have children, because she didn't see any way that was possible with her. All right, verse 14, We'll go read through 17. Then the woman said to Naomi, "Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a close relative, and may his name be famous in Israel, and may he be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is better to you than 7 sons, has borne him." Then Naomi took the child and laid him on her bosom and became a nurse to him. Also the neighbor women gave a name, saying, "There is a son born to Naomi," and they called his name Obed. He is the father of Jesse, the father of David. And the word Obed means one who serves, is what that name means. And then verse 15, and again, we haven't looked at Naomi's attitude lately, but in chapter 1 and 2, remember, she kind of had a very sour attitude. You know, I came here full, now I'm coming back empty and all that. But now, with this birth of a son here, her attitude kind of changes, and she is back again on top, if you will. And again, we've mentioned this in the beginning, that we see the providence of God, you know, in this whole thing, the providence of God. And so now, you know, things are restored. We might even say better than restored. Reminds me kind of like a Job. You know, he gets all that stuff happens to him in the beginning of the chapter or the book, and then at the end, all that stuff is restored even more so. And that's kind of like it is here. All right, and then
It doesn't mention that Boaz had a wife before.
no, it doesn't mention that, and that's a whole nother area that we're not going to talk about tonight. Okay, yeah. You know, because it does bring up the question about, you know, well, what if, like with Onan, you know, well, what if Onan, or even this other kinsman, maybe that's the reason why he didn't want to do it, because he already had a wife. But then it brings up, you know, well, did God allow multiple wives in that situation? And I would say, yes, he did. But wasn't always his ideal will. Well, that's our second bell, so I was wrong once again. But I can almost guarantee you, unless Faith asks me some kind of weird question. No, I almost guarantee you we'll finish this up next time, and then we'll get into Esther. All right? I appreciate your attention.